It was a quiet Saturday evening, and I was home alone. My parents had gone to a dinner party, leaving me to enjoy a peaceful night in. I decided to watch a movie in the living room, the soft glow of the screen casting flickering shadows across the walls. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Just as the movie reached its most intense moment, I heard a faint noise coming from the garage. At first, I thought it was just the wind or the house settling, but the noise grew louder, more insistent. It sounded like someone was trying to force the garage door open. My heart began to race as I realized I might not be alone. Gripping my phone, I crept toward the door leading to the garage, moving as silently as I could. The noise continued, and I could make out muffled voices. I leaned over to peek through the small window in the door and saw two figures in dark clothing working together to break in. Panic flooded me as I realized they were moments away from succeeding. I dialed 911, whispering to the operator, who assured me that officers were on their way. But it felt like an eternity before they'd arrive. Just as I ended the call, the garage door finally gave way with a metallic screech, and the intruders stepped into the house. I ducked behind the kitchen counter, praying they wouldn't see me, but they found me almost immediately. One of them grabbed my arm, his grip cold and unyielding, and dragged me into the living room. The other began searching the house, yanking open drawers and flinging things aside. They demanded to know where my parents kept any valuables, but I was too terrified to speak. The man holding me pulled out his phone and dialed a number. After a moment, he hissed, "We've got your kid. Bring cash, no police, and they'll be safe." My parents' frantic voices leaked through the speaker, promising to do whatever it took if the intruders would just let me go. I held my breath, desperate to think of anything that might save me. Just then, there was a loud bang outside, followed by heavy footsteps coming up the porch. Then came a voice, loud and angry, calling out, "Who's in there? We've called the police!" The man holding me froze. They exchanged panicked glances. Another shout came from outside, closer this time, as if someone was right by the door. The neighbors must have heard the crash, seen the shadows moving through the windows. "Forget it," the man holding me hissed to his partner, his grip loosening. "Let's get out of here." He released me with a rough shove, and both men bolted toward the back door, vanishing into the dark yard. Shaking, I stumbled toward the front door and flung it open. My neighbors were on the porch, their faces tight with worry and fear. One of them pulled me close, saying in a voice that tried to be steady, "You're okay now. They're gone. We're right here." Sirens wailed down the street, and red and blue lights began flashing across the yard. The police arrived within minutes, officers swarming the property and moving in and out of the house, searching each room. The neighbors stood by, arms crossed, casting glances back toward the trees and shadows surrounding the house, as if expecting the intruders to reappear at any moment. After the officers had taken my statement, I felt strangely empty. My neighbors stayed close by, offering reassuring words, but nothing felt safe. Nothing felt real. As the police finished up, one of the neighbors gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze and said, "You're always welcome with us, okay? You know that." I nodded, but the words felt far away. When the officers finally left, the house seemed darker than before. I couldn't shake the feeling that those men might return, or worse, that they had never truly left. Every corner of the room felt heavy, filled with shadows that seemed to stretch, waiting to close in as soon as I was alone again. My neighbors glanced back at the house uneasily, as if they sensed it too. They tried to smile as they left, but the worry on their faces betrayed them, and as I stood in the empty living room, staring into the quiet darkness, one question echoed in my mind. How did they know I'd be home alone? How had the neighbors known to come over so quickly? The more I thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. The intruders had barely stepped inside before they'd arrived, and while I was grateful someone had come to help, the timing felt too perfect, almost staged. I stepped back inside and locked the door, feeling the house's familiar silence settle around me, somehow heavier than before. I tried to reassure myself, to push away the dark thoughts, but doubt gnawed at me, whispering in the back of my mind. An hour later, just as I was starting to doze off, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number, and my skin prickled as I opened it. "Everything all right over there?" it read. A chill raced down my spine. I knew who had sent it. The same people who had reassured me on the porch, who had offered comforting words and a safe place to go. The same people who, now that I thought about it, had watched my parents leave that evening, had seen me home alone. Another message came through. "Doors open if you want to come over. We'd hate for you to feel alone after all that." The words stared back at me, as if daring me to respond. My heart pounded as I read the text again, trying to decide if I was overreacting. But the shadows in the room seemed to close in, and a realization formed, chilling me to the bone. They weren't just neighbors. They were part of this, watching me, planning. Maybe they had even let those men into the garage, making sure it looked like they were the heroes. I tried to brush the thought away, telling myself I was just shaken up, imagining things. But as I turned off the lights, my phone buzzed again with a new message. "We'll always be here if you need us." I stared at the screen, the words casting a strange, heavy chill over me. Were they just concerned neighbors? Or had they meant something else? How much had they really seen? How much did they really know? Whatever their intentions were, one thing was certain. They were watching, and they always would be. As a kid, I'd be left alone with a teenage babysitter. So technically, I wasn't home alone, but there were no adults. One time, a strange man walked in the front door where we were playing and looked surprised to see us there. I remember the man claiming to be a pizza delivery driver and asking us if we ordered a pizza. I glanced at my babysitter, Emily, who seemed as confused as I was. We hadn't ordered anything, and I could tell something wasn't right. The man was tall, with a scruffy beard and a menacing look in his eyes. Emily stood up and told the man he must have the wrong house, but he insisted he had the right address. Something in his voice sent shivers down my spine. I retreated to the living room, feeling a growing sense of dread. Emily tried to close the door, but the man pushed it open, stepping inside. He looked around the house, his eyes darting from room to room, surveying every nook and cranny. Emily grabbed my hand and whispered for me to run to my room and lock the door. I did as she said, my heart pounding in my chest. From my room, I could hear the man's voice growing angrier. He was demanding to know where my parents were and who else was in the house. His tone was unnerving, filled with a mix of frustration and malevolence. I hid under my bed, trying to make myself as small and quiet as possible. The man's footsteps echoed through the hallway, and I could hear him opening doors, searching the house methodically. He reached my room and tried the handle, but it was locked. He pounded on the door, shouting for me to open it, his voice growing more agitated with each passing moment. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. The pounding stopped, and I heard a loud crash from downstairs. Emily screamed, and I felt a wave of panic. I wanted to help her, but I was too scared to move. I clutched a small stuffed animal tightly, hoping it would give me some semblance of comfort. Suddenly, the sound of sirens filled the air. The man cursed and ran out of the house, the front door slamming behind him. I stayed hidden under the bed until I heard Emily's voice calling my name. I crawled out, my body shaking with fear. Emily was standing in the hallway, her face pale and her eyes wide with terror. She had managed to call the police while the man was distracted, and they had arrived just in time. The officers searched the area, but couldn't find the intruder. They questioned us, trying to get a description of the man. Emily's voice trembled as she described his scruffy beard, piercing eyes, and the way he had forcefully entered the house. It turned out that the man had been posing as a pizza delivery driver, likely targeting homes with young children or babysitters. The police assured us they'd patrol the neighborhood more frequently, but the sense of security I'd once felt was shattered. That night, after the officers left, Emily and I tried to settle back down, but sleep was out of the question. As the hours passed, every little noise made us jump. Emily sat on the couch with me, keeping a close watch on the front door. The air was thick with tension, and the house seemed to creak more than usual. Shadows danced on the walls, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched. Morning eventually came, bringing with it a semblance of safety. My parents returned home, and I ran into their arms, tears streaming down my face. They listened intently as Emily and I recounted the events of the previous night. My dad immediately called the police to get an update on their investigation, while my mom held me close, trying to comfort me. The police increased their patrols in our neighborhood, and for a while, things seemed to return to normal. But the memory of that night haunted me for years. Every time I heard an unexpected knock at the door, my heart would race, and I'd find myself checking the locks over and over. Emily, too, was affected. She never babysat at our house again, and we remained in touch, bound by the shared terror of that experience. Last summer, I decided to rent a house in the woods for a relaxing getaway. The place I found was a charming, rustic cabin nestled deep in the forest, far from the hustle and bustle of city life. It seemed perfect, a peaceful retreat surrounded by nature. I arrived in the early afternoon, excited to start my vacation. The cabin was quaint, with wooden beams, a stone fireplace, and large windows that offered a stunning view of the surrounding woods. I spent the day exploring the area, hiking through the trails, and enjoying the serenity of the forest. The first night, everything was perfect. I enjoyed a quiet evening by the fireplace, listening to the crickets chirping outside. But on the second day, I got a call from my friends. They had an emergency and wouldn't be able to join me as planned. I was disappointed but decided to make the most of my solo trip. As night fell, the atmosphere began to change. The forest seemed to close in around me, and the shadows cast by the firelight danced menacingly on the walls. I decided to call it a night and headed to my room, feeling a bit uneasy. Just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard it, a faint tapping sound coming from outside. At first I thought it was just the wind or a branch brushing against the window, but the tapping grew louder and more insistent. My heart began to race. I got out of bed and slowly approached the window. The tapping continued, rhythmic and deliberate. I pulled back the curtain, expecting to see a tree branch or some animal, but there was nothing there. The woods outside were dark and still. Just as I was about to turn away, the tapping stopped. I stood there in silence, my breath held, when suddenly a face appeared in the window, a pale, expressionless face with hollow eyes staring straight at me. I screamed and stumbled back, knocking over a lamp in my panic. I grabbed my phone and called the police. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely dial the number. The operator assured me that officers were on their way, but it felt like an eternity before they arrived. As I waited, the tapping started again, now accompanied by a low, almost inaudible mumbling. I couldn't make out what the voice was saying, but its presence was unmistakably sinister. I kept the lights off and stayed hidden, praying that the intruder wouldn't try to break in. Finally, I saw the flashing lights of a police car outside. The figure must have seen them too, because it suddenly turned and vanished into the woods. The officers searched the area but found no sign of him. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I was alone, I felt eyes on me, and every creak and groan of the cabin made me jump. I started to keep the curtains closed and double-check the locks on all the doors and windows. On the last night of my stay, just as I was starting to feel a bit more at ease, I heard the tapping again. My heart sank as I realized the silent watcher had returned. This time, I didn't bother looking. I called the police immediately and stayed on the line with the operator until the officers arrived. They searched the property and found fresh footprints in the mud outside the window, confirming my worst fears. The police increased their patrols in the area, but the intruder was never caught. To this day, I don't know who he was or why he targeted the cabin, but the memory of his silent presence haunts me, a chilling reminder that sometimes the things we fear most are the ones we can't see. I was 16 years old, home alone for the weekend while my parents were away on a business trip. It was a quiet Friday night, and I decided to relax with a good book. The house was eerily silent, save for the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. As I was engrossed in my book, I heard a faint tapping sound coming from the front door. I dismissed it at first, thinking it was just the wind, but the tapping grew louder and more insistent. My heart began to race as I put down my book and listened intently. The tapping turned into a series of loud, deliberate knocks. I cautiously approached the door, peering through the peephole. To my surprise, there was no one there. I felt a chill run down my spine as I slowly backed away from the door. Suddenly, the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, using its flashlight to navigate through the pitch-black rooms. I tried to call my parents, but there was no signal. Panic set in as I realized I was completely cut off from the outside world. I decided to check the circuit breaker in the basement, hoping to restore the power. As I descended the stairs, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps above me. My blood ran cold as I realized someone was inside the house. I quickly turned off my phone's flashlight and hid behind a stack of old boxes. The footsteps grew louder, echoing through the empty house. I held my breath, praying that whoever it was wouldn't find me. The footsteps stopped, and I heard a low, menacing voice call out, "I know you're here." My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to remain as still and silent as possible. The intruder began to search the basement, opening boxes and moving furniture. Just as I thought I was about to be discovered, the intruder's phone rang. He answered it, speaking in hushed tones. I took the opportunity to quietly slip out of my hiding spot and make my way back upstairs. I locked myself in my bedroom, barricading the door with a chair. I could hear the intruder moving through the house, searching for me. My mind raced as I tried to come up with a plan. I remembered that my dad kept a baseball bat in the closet for protection. I grabbed it, gripping it tightly in my trembling hands. The intruder eventually made his way to my bedroom door, trying to force it open. I braced myself, ready to defend myself if necessary. The door creaked and groaned under the pressure, but the chair held firm. Suddenly, the intruder stopped. I heard him mutter something under his breath before the sound of footsteps retreated down the hallway. I waited, my heart pounding, until I was sure he was gone. I cautiously opened the door and peered out into the hallway. The house was silent once more. I made my way to the front door, unlocking it and stepping outside. The cool night air was a welcome relief after the suffocating fear I had felt inside. I ran to a neighbor's house and called the police. They arrived quickly and searched my house, but the intruder was long gone. They found signs of forced entry and confirmed that someone had indeed been inside. To this day, I don't know who the intruder was or what they wanted, but the memory of that night still haunts me, a chilling reminder of how vulnerable we can be when we're home alone.